Hey everyone, welcome back into the Sampleist. My name's Greg, thanks for joining me. I've really been looking forward to today's featured instrument, David Forner's Lux Violin. David made a huge splash recently with his Barbarian Cello, a beautifully rich solo cello that I reviewed here on this channel, links below. Check it out after you're done here. Lux Violin is a beautifully exquisite addition to complement Barbarian Cello, and like Barbarian Cello, Lux Violin has the same range of fantastic articulations including legato, staccato, pizzicato and more. And it includes some lovely features like the legato and a brilliantly programmed rebowing technique that I'll share more of later. As for requirements, Native Instruments full Kontakt 5.8.1 or above is required. This is not for the free Kontakt player. 8 GB of RAM and an absolute minimum is recommended, and it downloads at a total of 7.5 GB of disk installed. And at the time of recording this video, which is in the middle of the Black Friday sales 2023, it's now available at £67.77. Now that's normally £135.55, a saving of 50%. Check out Loot Audio's website for the latest details if you're watching this after Black Friday. And as always, our Sampleist declaration. I'm very grateful to David for making a copy of the license available today. But having said that, he's had no input whatsoever into the making of this video. At the Sampleist, we take very seriously our commitment to transparency in all our reviews, so you can be confident that our opinions are ours and ours only. And before we go any further, be sure to hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you can be up to date on all the latest production releases in the world of virtual instruments. Okay, let's fire up the door and jump right on in. And this is David Forner's Lux Violin. So a quick overview of the UI features are in order before we dive straight into the sounds. So the articulations are very neatly laid out across these two lines. A settings button here allows you to adjust the dynamics of your CC controllers. I'm just going to keep it at the standard. Across the bottom we have a series of functions. One is the offset. I'm going to defer that till later because that plays quite an important role when you're working with Lux Violin. You can extend the range up and down slightly. So while we have the low open G, you can extend it down below its natural range, but I'm going to keep it at its natural G range there. And likewise at the high end you can adjust the high end as well. There's a stereo field that enhances or restricts the stereo field into a more narrow sense, mono. I like the stereo, let's keep it there. There's also a low pass filter. Let's keep it nice and bright. And of course, a reverb. Let's leave things where they are. And finally, a split switch, which is another important function that I'll talk about momentarily. So let me introduce you to the first of 3 legatos that David makes available with the Lux Violin. Very beautiful, very succinct, and I'm going to play you the first one called Lyric. Very strong, very powerful. He also offers a softer medium legato. Obviously not as crisp, a little softer on the strings. And finally, a soft legato too. Now, the real important thing to work with the legato that David has provided us with, he's got a very clever scripting system that works with the legato. Now, I need to introduce you to the offset button. This plays a really important role here. What you heard me playing then was just me noodling across the keyboard, but with the offset set at the absolute minimum, there is a natural inherent latency between each of the notes. And playing in real time means that I hear the note just ever so slightly after I've pressed on the keyboard. So what the offset allows you to do, as the name suggests, gives you some extra, well, effectively softens the latency. So David suggests when you're playing live, as I am now, you can just set it around about 75 milliseconds. And it feels a whole lot more natural under your fingers. But where this feature really comes in is not so much for playing live here, is that the offset feature allows you to wind out all of the latency when you're actually recording in your legato pieces. But then when it comes to playback, you can wind back the entire offset back to 0, and you can also adjust your track delays in your DAW, whatever that is. I'm obviously using Cubase at the moment. And together, that's what allows you to work with this legato engine, because the legato engine's very clever in being able to weave a very natural legato sound to it. So there's the trade-off you have with legato. But for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to keep the legato at about 75, so we can have a compromise between a slight bit of latency, but also to give you a realistic view of what I'm playing. Now, legato playing live never really shows up, the power of the engine. When we come to the composition, I'll show you a few little legato flourishes that I think will help you come to terms with what this is really all about. Okay, let's move along and I'll show some of the other non-legato articulations that David has. Here is just the straight vibrato. Now, here's the point where I'd love to introduce you to another very important feature that David has programmed into the Lux Violin, and I think this is probably one of the key features. It's the rebowing technique. Now, the rebowing technique, obviously when a string player gets to the end of the length of their bow, they are forced to reverse the direction, and that's typically very difficult to program in a virtual instrument setting. David has created a very clever solution where you, as the programmer, the player with your MIDI keyboard, simply has to repeat two notes close together to create or trigger the rebowing effect. Can you hear there? I'm going to hold a note and then I'm going to hit two in succession and you'll hear the rebowing. Let me show you with the flautando. The flautando is a beautiful articulation, probably one of my favorite, and I find the rebowing really stands out here. There's the pulse. And if you watch the keyboard down below in blue, you'll see my fingers re-triggering the bowing. Now, this rebowing technique is available for every articulation with the exception of the overplayed, and I'll show you that shortly. But of course also the spiccato, in which a rebow doesn't make any conceptual sense. So bear that in mind. As I'm going through some of these long articulations to give you a flavour of what the violin can do, I'm going to throw in some rebowing technique along the way. Now let me revert very briefly to the legato momentarily to show you the rebowing technique you can use in the legato setting. I'll set it on soft. There's the rebowing. Gives a really lovely, realistic performance, even in the harmonics in the top register. Lovely sweet. That's what I really love about this instrument. There's so much programming detail in here that I think that really means you have to explore. It opens up the possibilities immensely, more than many other libraries that I've come across. Now, I'm not going to go through every articulation here because we'll be here quite a long time, and it's probably not the most interesting for you to sit here and listen to me play every single articulation, but I'm going to choose the ones where I think really allows this instrument to shine and invite you to explore the other ones. That said, this does not imply that each of these, the ones that I don't show you today, aren't at all valuable. They absolutely are. I'm just trying to optimize our time together here so you can get the best outcome, and I get the best outcome, and David gets the best outcome. So there's the harmonics. Let's have a listen to the overplayed. Overplay is when the violinist has struck the strings with a forceful downstroke. And with that forceful downward pressure, you can hear it probably play towards the bridge in a sul pont type of mode, very, very harsh sound. Now here you can hear the natural bow going backward and forward. That's not me playing the rebow technique. I'm literally holding down one note. And again, have a look at the blue keyboard below and you'll see my fingers playing along. Beautiful stuff. Now, as if it's not always already obvious, do be aware I'm also controlling CC1 and CC11 here, the modulation and the expression overall, and that's what's giving us, in this case, a lot of the volume swells. Momentarily, just going back to vibrato, here's a single note at low CC1 and CC11 and increasing. So you can get a lot of emphasis towards the end. Okay. With all that said, let's continue. The tremolo, a lovely, sharp, rapid tremolo. With a lovely pulse, energetic attack at the start, and you can also play a rebow within a tremolo. Gorgeous. Here's a really lovely, unique articulation. This is a sul pont tremolo. This is quite unique amongst all the set here too. And again, this is what gives it its really lovely raw character. And I think that's true with the whole violin as well. There is really faithful reproductions of your much-loved articulations and the legatos and the vibratos and the flatandos, but there's a certain earthy character about this. Have a listen to this. Now again, that's a single strike of the note. Now, here's the thing to note. If you were to play this particular articulation with low velocity, you will get a long note which slowly morphs into a tremolo. and then fades back out. But if you strike the note with a high velocity, it goes straight into the tremolo. Gorgeous. Let's move along now to the Micatos. So the Micatos have got a very strong pulse attack. It's almost like a spiccato note at the start of a long bow. And there's two of them. That was the long version. This is a shorter version. Gorgeous stuff. All right. I think I said earlier in the video I was going to go through all of them, but I can't afford to miss any of them out. I think they're all fantastic. All right. Maybe we'll continue. Now, here's a series of swells. 3 swells, long, medium, and short. And again, you can also rebow. Maybe briefly the other one. Let's go to the shortest of the swells. Again with the rebow. Really flexible, beautiful, beautiful stuff. Now over to the staccatissimo, one of my favourite articulations on the violin. David's done a fabulous job in creating high quality samples with really sharp, crisp articulation. Now I'm going to try and play some fast passages live, which is always a risk because my hands are not as accurate in timing as is a MIDI engine. But with that said, let's give it a go and we'll see what comes out. Noting we'll also throw in some velocity because there's different velocities. All the shorts are fabulous, maybe spiccato very briefly. Gorgeous stuff. And the staccato slightly longer, but beautiful nonetheless. And to round it out, some gorgeous pizzicato. So I want to return back to the legato momentarily just to give you a quick tutorial about how to use the legato and program it, at least the best that I could work out. This is to try and take advantage of David's excellent scripting in the legato to best effect. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move my Lux Violin to one side momentarily, and I'm going to record a short sequence of just a couple of bars. We'll have a look at the MIDI and we'll clean it up, and I'll show you how you can get some lovely legato lines. Okay, so I've armed my track here. I'm set the left-hand locator here in Cubase. I'm sure exactly the same in your DAW, and we're going to hit record. Okay, so let's have a look at what we've got here. So the thing with all legato programming is that you need to make really sure that all your notes are heavily overlapped. Now, I played that in live. I may not have done it totally cleanly. So going into the DAW, make sure that each of your notes are very clearly overlapped. As they are here, looks pretty good. Just going to expand this one out a little bit. Yep, they look pretty good. All right, cool. With that said, there wasn't too much cleanup required, but just make sure that all your notes are heavily overlapped, and hopefully that will trigger all the right notes. Let's have a listen. Nice, so that came up pretty well. Now, having done that, I had recorded that, as you'll note over here, with the offset at 75. If I'd wound it up all the way to 140, it might have played a little, in real time, more without the latency, but it was tolerable for me. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow David's instructions. We're now going to wind back that offset all the way back to 0. We're going to return back to the start of the track. I'm just going to return my locator over here. And now, importantly, I want to draw your attention over here to the track delay. Now, you can do this in nearly every DAW, I'm sure. This is how you do it in Cubase. Now, what I didn't mention earlier in the video, there's an information panel here. And David has given us some recommendations on track delays depending on the articulation you're using. And in the case of legato, he's recommending that there's a delay of 220 milliseconds. So in my track delay here, I'm going to type in minus 220 because it's a negative track delay. I'm going to return back to, I'm going to put the click on, and I'm going to see now what we get with a lot clearer sound. So there you have it. Interestingly enough, I didn't realise, but I've actually got a tempo change here. Silly me. So let me just get rid of that. And let's push this one up to, let's make it about 90. I'll get that one out of the road. And that's why, let's see how we go here. Try it again. And bringing your eyes down to the MIDI below. Playing once again. And I might even just round that out by even pushing the tempo a little higher. Let's call it, I don't know, 110. Let's see what those legatos sound like now. And it performs brilliantly. There you go. So I thought I'd leave that little snippet of a tutorial there for you to help you understand how to program the legato. It takes a little bit of time, but the effort is really worth it if you want the results. So in summary, record your MIDI with the offset relatively high or even all the way to give you a natural feel as you're playing it in. wind back the offset, clean up your MIDI to make sure that all the notes are overlapping, and then set your track delay, in this case for legato, to about -220, and you should end up with some lovely, lovely results. Okay, fabulous. Let's put it all together now. I'm going to show you a short composition I wrote using Lux Violin, and then on the other side of that, I'll decompose what it is that I did and the decisions I made to give you some insights to my thought process, and then after that, we'll wrap up today's video with my final thoughts. Okay, so let's have a quick walk through of the composition process and the thinking that I went through. And what my aim here was to try and highlight David's violin in as much of its flexibility as I could in a short 2-minute passage. Now, that's a tall order because it's a very flexible instrument. It can play many, many styles, and I can't do them all inside 2 minutes. But I've tried to get two different types of music here together to blend together. One is an opening sequence of growing crescendo intensity of strings, followed by a more somber, classically inspired piece. So let's have a quick look at what we've done here. The starting part I actually started with was actually to call upon David's Barbarian Cello. So what I actually did was I just thought I wanted to get some rhythm, some ideas, so I just dragged out an arpeggiator. And I used this arpeggiator to generate some arpeggiated sequence of notes that I thought I would assign to David's Barbarian Cello. Now, David's Barbarian Cello is a fabulous instrument. I encourage you to look into it after you've finished with this video. It's a great addition. So with that said, let me just highlight and solo the cello strings, and I just simply ended up with, now it's increasing in volume because I wanted to build the intensity, but just a simple repeating sequence between D, A, B flat and G. That's all it does. But that needed some depth to it, so I went and hired up some drones. There's some drones here. Let's say the drones could give me some stuff like a rhythmic bass with a ticking sound, a high drone. Again, giving those elements of rhythmic propulsion. That's probably a good word, propulsion. So if I put them on, and then you get them. Now, I also brought together some ensemble strings, again, using just an ensemble string orchestral patch. Bring your favorite one to the party. That's great. All it does is provide a simple support line So again, just to show you what that sounds like. Now, yes, now what I did here, I'm just going to advance this a little bit because it's increasingly the crescendo. It's a series of Bartók pits, and for those who aren't familiar, the Bartók pits is when the player pulls the string and it slaps against the fretboard. And in this particular ensemble library I'm using, it provides a very percussive, powerful bass, purely just with double basses and cellos. Now, let's put them together with the pulses, with David's Barbarian Cello, and we get the bass line. Increasing in volume. Hear the Bartók pits coming in. I brought in some ensemble strings, adding some more rhythmic patterns. Building intensity, adding some layers to the mid strings. Cool, so there's our bass line, our driving rhythm. But let's introduce the star of the show, David's Lux Violin. David's Lux Violin, here at the very start, let's take everything off mute, is been commandeered in the legato setting. So let's just draw your attention down here to the line here. A very simple opening passage to introduce it. I've also gone to the trouble, and I suggest you might like to do so too if you have this feature on your door, and I'm sure you do, most good doors do, is the ability to change your articulations throughout your patch. And I'll show you how I've done that here. So let's go back to what we have here. And here comes David's Lux Violin in legato. Now I've gone into a tremolo. Increasing in volume. Louder. And as you can hear, I've introduced probably the next star of the show, an instance of David's violin in spiccato, giving us a very strong series of shorts, as you can see here. Not a complex pattern, just simple triads with some repeating pattern. Let me just solo that for you. Oops, wrong one, beg your pardon. Repeating. All right, there you go. Now I've also thrown in, for good measure, another violin instance that probably just provides a bit more doubling down there. So you get this kind of effect. Two violins providing that really strong rhythmic bass. Let's put them all together, shall we? So now we've got the violins, and this brings home the part of the main epic string opening sequence. And let's take everything off mute. Building up to a final crescendo. Cool. This is the point where we transition into a softer, melodic, more classical transition, if you will. What have I done here? Again, I've called on David's Lux Violin to transition from the sharp staccato vibrancy into a more softer, melodic, tension-filled transition, perhaps. Let me solo that, and here it is here. Let's have a look what's going on here. All right, so again, just briefly, because I think it's worth a little bit of extra time if you'll indulge. The section here, I've got the trempont. If you recall, in our earlier part of the video, You hold down the note and it vibrates into a soft trem. Add them together. And then took a bit of a chance and did a very quick transition in legato to introduce a long lyric legato. So you can see all the articulations switching using these articulation maps, or in Cubase, expression maps. Your traditional legato. Worth noting too, just very briefly while I've got it here, see the two D notes together? They're split in half, they're two separate notes. And that's what gives us the rebowing trigger that we spoke of earlier. So have a quick listen. Legato up and down to the two Ds. Beautiful. And the two Gs as well. Lovely way that you can use the rebow technique. Okay, we're nearly in the home straight. Let me introduce you to the rest of the string orchestra that supports David's violin. I've commandeered a viola to provide the mid-range of the strings. I provided another instance of David's Barbarian Cello to provide some swells. And I've also got a counter melody, which is another instance of David's legato violin to provide a counter melody. So that second part, if I just play it in isolation, it's more of a very classical, dare I say it, Bach-inspired piece perhaps. Let's have a look at the video, the MIDI. An extra violin, the counter melody, across the top. So there you have it, a quick rundown of the composition on how I chose to use David's Lux Violin. Let's switch over now and I'll give you my final thoughts and we'll wrap up today's video. So now to my final thoughts. I think once again, David has continued to create a quality line of instruments for all musicians, both beginner and professional alike. Lux Violin has a beautifully rich, natural and warm character, but can also be beautifully harsh and powerfully crisp and dynamic as well. The instrument comes with a solid range of articulations suitable for most circumstances, but the stars of the show is the legato engine and the delicately smooth rebowing engine, both beautifully programmed. Like any quality instrument, whether real or virtual, time spent to familiarise yourself with it, its quirks and its programming will allow you to break through to create lovely lines. It doesn't try to be an instant out-of-the-box workhorse like some other libraries do. Other libraries will sacrifice quality of outcome to give you instant playability because they program away your flexibility. David hasn't done that here. He's gone for quality as the end result, and in return he asks that you take the time to mould yourself around the violin. Once you've done that, you'll have a violin that will feel like a comfortable pair of jeans that you can rely on as a soloist or as an accompanist for the rest of the string orchestra. With Barbarian Cello and now Lux Violin, David has started a promising line of virtual instruments that are genuinely high quality and worthy of a place in your template. I'm not sure what David might have in mind as his next offering, but I for one will be eagerly awaiting its arrival. So that wraps up today's video. All that's left for me to do is to say thank you once again for stopping by and spending some of your time with me. At the Sampleist, we absolutely love this stuff, and doing it is our contribution to the virtual instrument community. So to help us out, give us a like for all the great content we produce, leave me a comment telling me what you think of David Forner's Lux Violin, and of course be sure to subscribe to stay on top of the latest and greatest virtual instrument releases. This is Greg Revell for the Sampleist signing off, and as always urging you to find your sounds and find your soul. See you on the next one.